The following is an original production of AZPM News.
For AZPM, I'm Mark McLemore, and this is Arizona Spotlight. Coming up, I'll talk to Alison Bechdel, one of the leading graphic novelists of our time. How comedian Paula Poundstone is saving democracy one laugh at a time. And meet author, podcaster, publisher, and above all, book lover, Zibby Owens. These interviews are all next on Arizona Spotlight. Artist and writer Alison Bechdel is now an established fine artist in the field of graphic novels. But Bechdel first made her name in the late 1980s with a comic strip called Dykes to Watch Out For, which ran in various indie newspapers across the country. For the LGBTQ+ community, it was meaningful representation. For many others, including myself, it was a social icebreaker, and it helped to educate and entertain. Growing up in Texas as a straight, cisgendered white male, it was the very first queer art that I was ever exposed to, and it taught me a lot. When I began my conversation with Alison Bechdel, I let her know how an early sequence in her comic strip influenced me to be more open-minded and led me to make new friends and started me on a path to being a better person.
My goodness.
Well, I honestly feel that way. And so I don't think I would have gotten on that road had it not been for encountering some of your early work.
Mark, that's so moving. Oh, my God.
So what do you recall about that period in your career, like 1986, 87, 88? Where were you living? How were you feeling about your choice to dive in and be a cartoonist? And what comes back to you from that era?
Okay, well, first of all, that's very moving, and I'm just impressed that you were even open to reading that at that point in time. That's a testament to you, you know.
I didn't have to be convinced that it was art. I already knew damn well it was art.
Right. So you were predisposed. Okay. But still. Yeah, so back at that time, that was 1987, I think, I was living in Minneapolis, which I have been thinking about a lot over the past week, as you might imagine, as this crazy ICE situation is happening. I lived right in that neighborhood. I lived 3 blocks from where Nicole Renee Good was shot. I lived 8 blocks from where George Floyd was killed. I know that neighborhood, and it very much informed my comic strip. It's a neighborhood, it's a very diverse neighborhood filled with progressive activists of all kinds. All my neighbors were, as many of my housemates were. You know, everything's so dystopian lately, but I know this, by the time this interview comes out, this story is going to be, there's going to be 1,000 more worse stories probably, but I have been thinking a lot about that time, the years I spent living in South Minneapolis, which very much informed my comic strip and the development of the characters and the kind of things that they thought about and did.
Would you say that you were optimistic at the time? Were you more excited about what you were doing, or were you daunted?
I was very excited. I'm glad I didn't know where things were headed because that would have been a real bummer. But no, I felt very excited. I felt like we were already seeing all kinds of positive change based on activism that had been going on at that point for 20 years. And it felt very hopeful. Like, oh my God, people are really changing their minds. Laws are changing. One of the difficult things about what's happened since Trump got elected the first time is having to kind of revise my whole, the sense that history was progressing in a positive direction. It's clearly not.
Do you remember the first time that you began to realize that you actually had fans?
I do, and it was pretty early on when I first started publishing my cartoons in a little feminist paper in Manhattan. And I got a letter to the editor from someone saying how much they liked my cartoons, and I was totally hooked. Oh my God, somebody saw this and liked it, and that was enough to just keep me going for the next several decades. When I was living in Minneapolis at the time we're talking about, I had a part-time job, and I was making the rest of my living from my comics, and I was very eager to make myself into a full-time cartoonist, and it took a few more years, but by the time I turned 30, I was able to do that. And I was still living in the Twin Cities then.
When you go back and look at the art from that time period, what's your reaction?
Oh my God. Well, I sort of cringed when you mentioned that piece because I think it's terribly drawn and just kind of naive in many ways and silly. The way that most people probably look back on their juvenilia. But at the time, it was really the best I could do, and it felt important to me. And it might seem silly to me now, but I know that it was something that a lot of people found really heartening. Like we weren't used to seeing any kind of reflections of ourselves at all, let alone in this sexual way, except for, porn.
Yeah, but it was loose, and there was almost kind of a springy quality to some of your character work at the time. Like people had squash and stretch. And I'd like to know, Alison, do you often push yourself to improve your art in a certain direction? Or has your style evolved more naturally as a cohesive whole? I don't know, you tell me.
Well, I'm always trying to get better. And I feel like I've been lucky enough to be not a person who didn't start out with a strong drawing capability, but I've been able to improve it over the years, on the page, as I'm publishing. I'm just trying to get better. I don't think of myself as having different styles the way some cartoonists can draw in any number of different styles, and I cannot. I've just sort of cobbled together a set of skills, and I feel like I'm constantly getting a little better. I was just drawing my comic strip, Dykes to Watch Out For, this 8 to 10 panel strip that would come out every 2 weeks, and over the years, my drawings got smaller and smaller as I was trying to fit more story into that little space. And once I compared my word count from the early days to 15 years later, and my word count had doubled. So I was starting to work. It looked kind of microscopic, the stuff I was doing, and I realized I was kind of outgrowing that format. And that's when I shifted my focus over to doing full-length books.
Alison, how do you guide yourself between creating a narrative that you find pleasing and the sometimes fragmentary or even false ways that memories present themselves?
Well, I am someone who has always kept pretty obsessive track of their own life. I've kept a diary since I was 10. I have a pretty good memory, or I have a good memory for my early life. It's starting to fade a bit for anything later than that. But one of the things I love about memoir is that challenge of finding a story in all of the random events, finding that signal in the noise. And of course, there isn't a story. It's all just random. But I like finding a story that feels like I'm not just imposing it, but I'm finding it in that material. I like seeing how, I don't know, almost like you would interpret a dream or something, finding themes and meaning in all of this random material of our life. That's what I like to do.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of really interesting dream work in Are You My Mother? And the sequence that I just read earlier was about when you would pretend that you couldn't walk as a child, and you and your mother would play this game, and you have a note that says, I don't really remember what we said. All this dialogue is made up. And so whenever I run across a note like that from you in the work, I always feel like you're watching out for the reader and not letting us accept everything as the gospel in relation to your life. And,
yeah, God, I hate memoirs where people present these conversations from 60 years ago as if they had a tape recorder running. There's no way you can remember that. I'm making it up, so I want you to know that.
When you're writing, do you have a picture in your mind of the person that you might be writing to or writing for?
I used to. In my early days when I was writing my comic strip, I did have a clear picture, but I also really knew. I knew this is for my neighbors down the street and my my friends upstairs. And I would hear back from them constantly about what I'd done wrong or what I'd done right. But that has really changed over time. When I was writing Fun Home, at a certain point I realized, I don't know who I'm writing this for. I'm not sure that my old core audience is going to be along for this ride. This is something really different, a different kind of writing, a different kind of humor. And so at that point I decided I'm just going to write this book for myself and have it do what I need it to do. And that seems to have worked out, and that's kind of been my mode ever since, even though I know you're supposed to have a sense of your audience, but I don't really know who my audience is anymore.
Alison Bechdel is one of the featured authors at the 4th Annual Santa Fe International Literary Festival, happening May 15th through the 17th in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We have a link for more information on the Spotlight page at azpm.org. Paula Poundstone, in addition to being one of the most successful stand-up comedians in America, is a well-known voice to listeners of NPR as a regular panelist on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Paula Poundstone is returning to the Fox Tucson Theater on January 31st, and that gave me a third chance to talk with this unique comic visionary.
I thought maybe the hardest I'd ever worked was during the stay-at-home order, taking care of the house, taking care of all the animals, and trying to continue a connection with all the places that I work, all the audiences that I worked for, via Zoom and videos and blah, blah, blah. And I'm telling you, it was insane how hard I worked. But I think that I've actually superseded that, trying to save democracy. Because I'm up all night making videos. I get to bed at 5. Well, I had to get up because I'm traveling tonight, and now I have to do everything before I leave. Besides which, if I don't get up, the cats will tear the door down. They're not real forgiving cats. I have 11 cats. And it's funny because different cats are in charge of telling me about different things. For example, the dinner meal when he was alive was my cat Severus's job to tell me that it was dinner time. Breakfast is Mrs. Fezziwig. We call her Fez, but her full name is Mrs. Fezziwig. Okay. And if I don't do what they want right when they want it, and daylight savings time just puts a rift in the whole family. Because they're not looking at the clock. So they're like, yeah, no, this is really when you do usually give us.
I just saw you introduce Larry in a video. What's Larry's job?
Larry is kind of a bully, honestly. He's just trying to take everyone's job. He doesn't alert me to anything in particular except for his own food, because Larry eats on a slightly different schedule than everyone else. I got Larry 485 days ago. And
approximately.
I have never brought home an adult cat before. But I had gone to the shelter looking for a kitten, and I met Larry. And he was just a barrel with feet. He was this giant fat cat. And I had left. I wasn't interested in an adult cat. I just had seen him there. But I couldn't stop thinking about him because I thought he's going to die. He's stupidly fat, like that. He's criminally fat. And so when I got home, I called the shelter, and I drive back. And I get Larry, and I weighed him. He was 23.9 pounds. I told that to the shelter later, and they said, "Oh, then he lost weight since we took him in." They said he was 26 pounds when they got him. And long story short, Larry and I have been on a journey of Larry's weight loss. The last time I weighed him, after he'd been here for about 8 months, he weighed 11 pounds. So he's lost more than half of himself. No Ozempic. And honestly, I wish somebody would do for me what I've done for him. The main driver of his weight loss, for his breakfast, he eats low-calorie dry food, but I throw it for him one piece at a time. And he has to run and get it, which, by the way, delights him. I don't know if he liked it in the beginning, but he loves it now. So Larry alerts me when it's time for him to run for his food. And someday, because Larry doesn't realize that I'm losing my peripheral vision, someday Larry will die in a tragic accident because the way he alerts me is he runs in front of me when I'm walking.
Paula, is there anything that you're looking forward to right now? Something the audience can go, hey, I'm looking forward to that too.
I try not to drown people in politics. Sometimes, people come out to laugh a little bit to forget for a few minutes.
Yeah.
But I don't let them forget for very, very long. And I don't entirely know what I'm going to talk about because my favorite part of any show is just talking to the audience. I do the time-honored, where are you from, what do you do for a living? And in this way, little biographies of audience members emerge, and I use that from which to set my sails.
What's a red flag or maybe a green flag that you can get from an audience right away that lets you know what the evening is going to be like?
Oh, that's a really great question. I think most comics have this in their head, or certainly my generation of comics do, which is, you used to talk about your A material. I have been doing my International House of Pancakes joke about when I worked at the IHOP when I was 18 in Orlando, Florida, graveyard shift. I have been doing that joke since the first night I went on stage, which is 46 years ago now. I don't do it every night, but it's there for me. Yeah, I actually prefer not to do it, but sometimes, A, I can't remember anything else in that moment, and so I'll reach for it, or B, I feel like I'm on thin ice with the audience, and so I just go to my IHOP joke. It may be the only thing that job ever really gave me. For the most part, it was a depressing chapter in my life in many ways. But boy, I walked away with a couple of really good jokes.
The NPR family is vast, and we have many people who listen and who depend on the programming they hear on NPR as a lifeline, really. And Wait, Don't Tell Me has had enormous popularity over time. And Carl Castle, who used to be known lovingly as The Judge, was such a well-loved person in the NPR community. And when I interviewed you some years ago, right after Carl had passed, you told me a story about him that I found incredibly touching.
Well, I don't remember specifically, but what I do remember, I don't know how to tie a tie. So sometimes before we went on, my tie would be untied, and I'd ask Carl to tie it, which he would do. Want to make sure that it's just right. But it would be the kind where I could slide it down. He would tie it on him, and then slide it down, and I could put it on me. And I, to this day, still have ties in my closet that I wear that I've never undone, that the knot was tied by Carl Castle.
Paula Poundstone brings laughs to the Fox Tucson Theater on Saturday, January 31st. My next guest is Zibby Owens. She turned her successful podcast that was first titled Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books into the core of a publishing and book-selling business called Zibby Media. It includes a brick-and-mortar store in Santa Monica and a series of pop-ups in New York. Owens' daily podcast has been running for 8 years, and she's done more than 2,200 interviews with some of the leading literary voices in our world, as well as offering retreats, events, and book clubs for others who share her passion. But I started by asking Zibby about her name.
It's short for Elizabeth. And when I was a little girl, I couldn't pronounce Elizabeth, or a friend couldn't pronounce Elizabeth and called me Zibbeth. And my parents knew another Zibby and said, oh, we'll call her Zibby.
What is your preferred method of reading these days? Do you still like to turn paper pages, or are you a screen reader? Or like me, have you gotten really lazy and you like audiobooks?
I do not think listening to audiobooks is lazy, so don't feel bad about doing that. Any way of consuming stories that people spend years of their life writing is great. I prefer a hard copy, like a paper, old-fashioned book. I like to hold it in my lap. I like to flip the dog-ear pages, flip back and forth, underline. I like to really get in there with a book, and I like to learn through reading versus through listening.
When I think back to my early reading life and reading what seemed like more grown-up books or my first novels, I think about Watership Down. I think about To Kill a Mockingbird. Over the years, I've been lucky to make friends because of those books. It's like a great, not just conversation starter, but relationship builder. When you think back to your first novels, what comes to your mind?
Well, I love that you said it's a relationship connector when you read the same book. I like to say that no two people who have read the same book are really strangers. I feel like we go through a communal experience together when we read and love a book. I wish I could say my middle grade reading was as literary as yours. I did read all those books in school and all of that, but when I was at home, I was reading Little House on the Prairie and Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary and Nora Klein. When I got a little bit older, I started going through all my mom's books in her library, and I was reading Judith Krantz at far too young an age. So I like more commercial fiction about sort of the lived experience. Back then, it was definitely Judy Blume all the way.
I also read Judy Blume. When I realized in fourth grade all the girls were reading Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, I wanted to know what was going on. And so I read that book, and it really, recently a friend gifted me with a book you may be aware of that someone wrote fairly recently called Everything I Know About Women I Learned from Judy Blume.
Yes, I do know that book.
So a daily podcast. Now, I do a weekly half-hour show, and it's difficult sometimes. A daily podcast, that is really remarkable, and you get some very big names in the business. What is a recent interview that you are particularly happy with when you think about, oh man, that was a great conversation? Who comes to mind?
Well, just last week, I interviewed Eli Sharabi about his new book, Hostage, which was just so powerful. I inhaled the whole thing within a couple hours, and I was lucky enough to interview him for 20 minutes about his experience being a hostage. And I haven't been that nervous in years. I just hung on every word, like showing that kind of strength through adversity and how he made his way through and kept his optimism. I just felt like I was talking to a god of sorts. So that was one of my recent really powerful episodes.
I noticed that you interviewed David Duchovny.
Yes, I've interviewed him a couple of times.
What's that experience like for you?
It's great. You know, contrary to what I just said about being nervous about Eli Sharabi, I don't get nervous as much anymore talking to celebrities. I feel like so many people do, and I feel like for them, they're just like anybody else who wrote a book, and I have all this material to work with in the book, and I just want to connect with them over what they said and how they said it and what they meant. And I found that he and others have been very appreciative and just welcome the chance to talk about their thoughts versus some of the clickbait around that people want to talk to them about. So we went deep in that interview about his relationship with losing his father, losing his dog, what it means to write, his insecurity almost, and defensiveness over writing poetry at all as an actor, and trying to head that off at the pass. He's incredibly smart and introspective, and I have a lot of respect for him.
Let's talk about a subject that sadly has not gone away, banned books. What are some observations about banned books and the current climate that we live in terms of people finding the printed word to be a dangerous thing?
I think it's terrible. I do not believe in banning books. I think that everyone should have the right to read exactly what they want. I think there's so many big issues to fight in the world today. It's just exhausting thinking about them all. And I feel like banned books falls into one of these, like, this makes no sense. Why are people doing this? How can we make this better? Buckets. And I wish I had a magic bullet for this, but I just think it is such a shame, and I wish I knew how to fix it.
Would you have any recommendations for our listeners of something that you think has been unduly shamed?
I think a lot of the fiction around the LGBTQ community, all of those books being banned is such a shame. And I don't have a specific example. I know Rex Ogle has written beautifully on this topic in middle grade and adult, and I'm pretty sure one of his books had been banned. His name is Rex Ogle. I think that kids who may be feeling that they are of that persuasion, not having role models, not having inner monologues to make them feel less alone is such a tragedy, and really has mental health effects on kids. So I think that particular class of books being banned is dangerous to kids today.
I interviewed a retired librarian named Juanita Havel, who pointed out that the birth of paperbacks was an amazing moment for the publishing industry, because suddenly books which before were expensive and heavy to ship, now every drugstore in America, every bus station had a spinner rack of paperbacks. And for as much as a quarter or 35 cents, you could acquire a book that could become a lifelong friend.
I think a lot about the transition to ebooks and all of the thoughts around that. Ebooks, audiobooks, books on tape, and all of the talk about AI and how that might affect books. And I hadn't really thought too much about transition to paperbacks, although, of course, growing up, I do remember the spinning rack, which are harder to find now, I must say. I think that the publishing industry is always changing. There's always something new, and it always comes as a shock, and it always makes people think, oh, no, what about now? Or a temporary reprieve from something more difficult. I think the fact that you can snap your fingers basically and have a book appear on your phone, it's really cool. It changes decision making and all of that. You have to really think about why you want a physical book anymore versus a digital book. I do think a lot of people like paperbacks because of the price point and the convenience and not wanting to carry so much. Delighted that paperbacks are out there. That would be really not great without them. But I think it just speaks to the innovation of story consumption and the many ways the industry will try to deliver those stories in any way they can.
I talked with Zibby Owens. There's a link to her daily podcast, Totally Booked with Zibby, on the Spotlight page at azpm.org. Thank you for listening to Arizona Spotlight. This show is a production of AZPM and is posted weekly at azpm.org. The production engineer is Jim Blackwood. Production assistance by Sarah Ariano. I'm producer and host Mark McLemore.
This has been an original production of AZPM News.